So the 190 visa is permanent residence in Australia. So if you are granted this visa, you are a permanent resident of Australia. This is one of the most popular visas that people apply for when they look to apply for a skilled visa in Australia. Previously, the most popular visa was actually the 189. Now, unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of movement in terms of invitations for this visa, probably because of everything that's been happening with COVID and the uncertainty around it. However, in the last 2 years, I've seen lots of invitations for the 190 and 491s and all of that. The main reason I think for that is because one of the requirements to be invited for the 190 visa is that you must be invited by the state. Now, the requirements for the state usually is that you must be working. A lot of the times in your field, for example, if you study mechanical engineering, they require you to be working as a mechanical engineer to be invited. And I think that the department moved to focus on those visas because at least they know they're giving visas and permanent residence out to people who will be working and contributing, in this country, which is the entire point of the skilled visa. Today, my goal is to give you a very general overview of the requirements for the 190 visa. It actually gets really detailed when you look at the requirements for each state. But what I will do is I'll do a separate video going into detail for each state and my experiences with them. So let's take a step back and see what you actually need to do to apply for an expression of interest. Now, first of all, you must have an occupation on the occupation list. You must have your skills assessment. So depending on your occupation, for example, if you're a mechanical engineer, you would go and do a skills assessment with Engineers Australia. If you are a software engineer, you would go do a skills assessment with Australian Computer Society. Now, there are so many occupations on the list. I will leave a link below to the occupation list, and next to the occupation, you should be able to see who the assessing body actually is. To lodge an expression of interest, you also need to have English. Now, on the website, it says you need to have minimum of competent English, which is equivalent to 6 in each band. However, because of the competition of this visa, most people, I would know, majority have superior English. You can obviously do PTE or IELTS. Again, I'll leave a link in the description below to the different English tests that you can sit. So that's kind of the basic requirements for it. This is points tested, so you do have to score a minimum of 65 points. However, just forget that. Because of the competition, you need a lot higher than that. So depending on what state, if you're applying in South Australia or you're applying in Victoria, the points really vary from there. Last year, I had an invitation for a 190 for someone in Northern Territory with 70 points. And I think one of the lowest I've gotten for my clients for the 190 invitation in Victoria was 80 points. So it varies. Now to the fun part, you actually have to be invited by the actual state to lodge this visa. So I will leave a link below to all the different states and their requirements, and we'll go through a couple today. But again, I'll have to do a separate video on it because it's just too much detail to go through. So for example, if you want to migrate to Victoria, where Melbourne is, you have to go through the Live in Victoria website. And if you look at the requirements for a 190 invitation in Victoria, is that you must be using your STEM skills. You must be working in your occupations. So for example, if you have completed a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering and that's what your skills assessment says, you need to be working in that field essentially. Now, Victoria, because it's so competitive, they've actually added an extra requirement is that you must be working in a target sector. They have all the target sectors there, and the one that would fit for a mechanical engineer would probably be advanced manufacturing. One of the other target sectors is also agri-food, and mechanical engineers also, work in the agri-food industry. Just for another example, if you head over to New South Wales, the process is completely different again. They have a very strict occupation list, then they have extra requirements depending on the occupation. For New South Wales, you just lodge an expression of interest and you just wait to be invited. A little bit different to the process in Victoria again, where you have to lodge an expression of interest and a registration of interest. A little bit different. So I know a lot of people previously moved to New South Wales because a couple months ago, the requirements were you could be in this occupation and then you just have to be living in New South Wales for 3 months and you can apply. I had so many people, move to New South Wales because of that. And unless they had no other choice, I told them not to go. I said, just because it says you just have to live there for 3 months and you can get the 190, that sounds too easy. That sounds too good to be true. Anyway, so a lot of the clients who, were eligible to apply in Victoria, we just stuck to it and applied here. Unless they really couldn't find a job in their field, or something, a situation required them to be in New South Wales, I definitely told them not to go there. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, they just changed their requirements. The occupation list, I don't think the occupation list changed too much. However, the requirements changed. So they started inviting offshore applicants, and some occupations also require you to have 3 years work experience. A lot of the IT occupations and also a lot of the trade occupations. Now, I do want to say something quickly. New South Wales has to be different to every other state. So for example, one of the requirements is that if you want to count your work experience, you can only count after the date deemed skilled on your skills assessment. Not every single skills assessment has a date deemed skilled. You need to check with your individual assessing body, but generally speaking, the two main ones is VetAssess and ACS. So VetAssess and the Australian Computer Society, they have a date deemed skilled on there. It's just a different way that they calculate it. So you cannot calculate or claim those points for work experience unless it's after the date deemed skilled. You need to be very careful of that, because I've had people come to me after they got a rejection for New South Wales, and I looked at it's because they claimed the work experience before the date deemed skilled. Normally speaking, you can claim your work experience that's post-qualification. So if you finished your degree on the 1st of July 2019 and you started working straight away, and you lodge the application, say now, you can claim, your two and a bit years work experience. However, for example, Australian Computer Society, they require you to complete your professional year to get your skills assessment, which usually takes 1 year. So if you start working on the 1st of July 2019 and you do your professional year, which takes 1 year, the date deemed skilled on the skills assessment may be 1st of July 2020. So you cannot claim any work experience until after 1st of July 2020. You've got to be very careful with that, okay? Anyway, once you've gone through the initial process and you do receive your invitation to apply, normally speaking, it's pretty safe to say that you will get granted the visa. However, what you do need to be careful of is the points that you're claiming. Because if you look at the expression of interest, it's based on, certain requirements, and they give points for it. And obviously this is points based, but some people might, claim work experience by accident that they shouldn't have, or claimed other things. So it is actually really important you do get the proper legal advice before you go and do this, because I've had clients who were invited and then they got a refusal later because they claimed work experience when they shouldn't have. I had a client who was a nurse and they completed their studies, say in July 2020. They were working as a personal care worker prior to completing their studies, and they accidentally ticked yes to claiming work experience for the personal care work, which is not related to nursing. So unfortunately they got a refusal for it. So got to be very, very careful. Here are my top 3 states to apply in. Coming in at number 3 would probably be Northern Territory. I've had a very good experience with them over the last few years. I think that they are very good to their graduates. So for example, if you did study at Charles Darwin University, one of the streams allows you to apply for the 190 if you studied there for 2 years. My experience is that the clients who studied there for 2 years and have a skills assessment, as soon as they finished, they got invited. Really good experience there. Coming in at number 2 would be Victoria. I really like their system. I feel like because there's an expression of interest you have to lodge, and you have to lodge a registration of interest, you get to draft a submission to them, essentially explaining why you should get picked, explaining your talent, explaining your contributions, everything. And I really like that, because at least you get to plead your case, you get to do something, you get to actually do something. For your application. We spend hours on these applications for our clients, because we want to make a really good, succinct argument to make sure that they stand out in front of all the other applicants. And at least you can do that. Whereas, for example, another state like, say, New South Wales, they just tell you to lodge your expression of interest, then you wait to get invited. That's it. And an expression of interest is literally just a form. You just fill out your details, you claim your points, whatever, and that's it. You don't get to put more forward for yourself. So I like the Victoria system. Coming in at number 1, my absolute favorite, where I grew up, is definitely South Australia. So South Australia has very clear-cut requirements. So for example, software engineer, to apply for the 190, you must be working there for 2 years before you can apply. Or for, I think, a diesel mechanic, you need to be working there for 6 months before you can apply for the 190 visa. What I like about that is that once you start working and you work the 6 months, and 6 months, 2 days, we lodge the application, it's such a simple process, and most of the time you do get invited. I've never seen a rejection unless there was something wrong with the employment or something. I've never seen, anyone not essentially get invited. It's such a smooth process. So when people ask me, where should I go study? Where should I move to? Where should I start this journey? My first reaction is always South Australia. If they graduated in Melbourne and they're working in, already in their field in Melbourne and whatnot, I'd tell them to stay there. But if they're starting the journey, they're going to look for jobs, they're going to start the whole process, I definitely say South Australia. The last thing I want to mention is that I know a lot of people, there's a lot of negative feedback about the Australian skilled migration system and how it all works. And I do understand, and I totally get you, it changes a lot. It changes a lot, the requirements change, it's a little bit, it's a little bit unfair in that sense. However, I don't want you to forget what is at stake here. It is permanent residence in Australia. So many people want to come to Australia to study and work here because they want to live here permanently in the future. And I'm not sitting here trying to sell you Australia or the migration or whatever. I speak from personal experience. I'm a migrant myself. My parents moved here, many years ago, and my parents said to me one day, they said, if you weren't here now, we'd probably be saving money in China right now to send you to Australia to study, so hopefully you can migrate, because the opportunities and the lifestyle in Australia, you can't compare it. My mom said you probably wouldn't have the same opportunities you have in Australia compared to overseas. And it is what it is. So again, I'm not trying to sell you anything or whatever. It's just I speak from personal experience. When I travel, I love traveling. But when you come back to Australia, you're kind of like, wow, we are so lucky. We have everything here. I don't take a second for granted. And so I don't want you to forget what's at stake. The potential of once you become an Australian permanent resident. The opportunities are endless. Anyway, as I said, each state has different requirements for the 190 visa. Changes from time to time too. What I'll do is I'll do a different video for each different state in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to be releasing a YouTube video twice a week this year. That is my goal. If you have any videos if you have any topics or migration questions you have, leave in the comments below and I'll get around to answering them. Have a great day, guys.